Hello and welcome to WorldCanvass. This is the second program in our new series focusing on all things international. WorldCanvass is presented by International Programs, your global intersection connecting the world in a university without borders. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us this afternoon in the Senate Chamber of the Old Capitol. This program will be broadcast over UI-TV and KRUI-FM, and we're streaming the program live over International Programs' website, international.uiowa.edu. Tonight's WorldCanvass will take as its main focus the stunning and wildly varied continent of Africa. Our guests will share their experiences living in and working in this complex and diverse place, and will introduce you in our short 2 hours to some of the people, cultures, and pressing issues facing Africa. We begin with a project that is extraordinary in every way, and the man behind it will tell us how it came about and how it's now changing the world. Please welcome our first guest, Cliff Missen.
Thank you, Joan.
A very brief introduction by me. I know Cliff can tell this story backwards and forwards, and I'll leave it to him to give you all the main elements. But the WiderNet project and the eGranary digital library are the main things we're going to be talking about in this first segment of the program. And the WiderNet project, as I understand it, is housed within the University of Iowa School of Library and Information Science. And according to information I found, you have delivered technology training programs for over 4,000 African university administrators, librarians, and technicians. And you've received funding from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, Intel Corporation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, USAID, and the United States Department of State. And the goal of this project is a big and grand goal. Tell us what it is.
Well, we're casting a wider net, right? Getting information technology into schools and hospitals. You know, 7 out of 8 people in the world don't have access to the internet. And so we talk about a world wide web, it really isn't. So our mission is to get this kind of technology into places where people can't afford it the way we use it, but coming up with creative ways to make it accessible there.
But that's a shocking thing to learn, isn't it? Did you say 7 out of 8 people in the world?
Right.
Do not have ready access to the internet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to imagine that here. I mean, we have, you know, cell phones, home phones. We have some of us walking around now with getting internet on our handhelds.
Yeah.
And, you know, the technology is changing in Africa. There's more people with phones. There's more people who have internet. But across Africa, internet penetration is only 2%. It's about 60, 70% here in the U.S. So it's going to be a while before most Africans are connected to this great global digital conversation that we're having.
Yeah, and so that would be true even in the large cities. We couldn't assume, for example, that by going to the capital city of an African country, you could get internet anywhere.
Well, I was just in Nigeria a couple of weeks back, and in the capital city, I was able to get internet at my hotel for $20 a day. It was slower than a phone modem, and it disappeared for hours at a time. Later on, I went up north where they were having a federal/religious holiday, and none of the hotels there had the internet working because the internet people had turned off the equipment and gone home for 3 days.
Oh.
Yeah. So when it works, it's very, very slow. It's very rare to find it, and sometimes for the places where we're working, sometimes the connection goes down for days or weeks at a time.
So take us back a little bit and tell us how this particular project began. How did you and others envision something called WiderNet and then the eGranary digital library that now exists?
Well, this started in 1999. I did a Fulbright year teaching at the University of Jos in Nigeria. And at the time, I was teaching about computers and networking, and I went around and visited a number of universities in Nigeria to find out, you know, what they were planning on doing with information technology. And I found a lot of schools where people had, well, at one school, they had just spent almost $200,000 getting a donated computer, mainframe computer, shipped in and installed at their school. They never actually got it working. It was a computer that I would have found here at the Salvation Army or Goodwill store.
Yeah.
And it had been donated by an American corporation, and they'd spent all that time and money getting it there, and it was useless to them. And I found a whole bunch of examples like that, and I realized, well, you know, there is not a role for us to play as being sort of a friend in the business. One of the vice chancellors I met with said, you know, the only people who want to talk to us are those who have something to sell.
Yeah.
And so we define the role of the WiderNet project as being sort of the friend who would provide good advice. The other thing is there's a lot of people who talk about there being a digital divide. And I think that term is a luxury for us. We have digital technology, and when we try to connect with people digitally in places like Africa and can't, we say, aha, there's a digital divide. But that's because we're looking through these lenses of our digital world. I don't think there's a digital, there might be a refrigerator divide, there's a road divide, there's an antibiotic divide, there's an education divide. It's an economic divide. They're poor. And so a good part of our mission is coming up with cost-effective, high-impact ways to use information technology in those kinds of situations.
Well, someone here in the audience, Karen Chappell, took me around the WiderNet collection room for the computers that are considered useless by the local family that may just want to donate to someone else. And these are repurposed by you, community volunteers, and by others, and become immensely useful tools when sent to an organization that's participating with WiderNet and the digital library. Please explain how all that works.
Yeah. Well, for them, you know, to purchase a computer there, it's going to be $800, $1,000, and this is money they simply don't have. So we have people here who donate computers, and we're pretty picky. We want fairly recent computers that are in good working shape. We have volunteers who have put in over 10,000 hours so far, refurbishing the computers and upgrading them a little bit, making sure everything works, weeding out the stuff that isn't useful. And then we pack it up, 300 computers in a cargo container. Cargo container is the cheapest way to ship stuff. And we use books as padding, so put in 5,000 books and ship it over there. And the recipients pay for the shipping. So in the end, these computers cost them about $25 a piece. Wow. And our partners tell us, you know, there's a whole bunch of things they can do with a $25 computer that they wouldn't do with an $800 computer. Oh. At one university, they actually went and sold the computers for $50 to the students. They sold half of them. And from the money they raised by selling these computers to the students, they were able to hire staff to install the other half of the computers on their campus.
Yeah. So you sort of explained the computer part of it, but let's talk about the eGranary digital library and what that actually is, this computer in a box.
Well, this is something that grew out of my experience, my Fulbright at JOS, and that was just being frustrated and not being able to click a button and get the resources that I wanted. And you know, I just visited some schools in Ethiopia. 12, 13, 14,000 students at these schools. And it looks like a normal school, except nobody's carrying books. They just don't have the books. And the teachers are teaching out of their head, and the students are taking notes on what note paper they have, but they just don't have the materials. So what I realize is that when people put things on the World Wide Web, they want to share it with the world. So we came up with this idea of first shipping CD-ROMs and then shipping hard drives, and we would contact these authors and publishers, get their permission, and then make a mirror copy of their website. Put it on a hard drive and send it to schools in Africa. And for any of us who use the internet, the weakest link is the internet itself. Our computers are fast, our servers are fast, but the internet is slow. So when we put information inside their school on their local area network, they're actually opening up these resources 5 times faster than we do here at the University of Iowa. It's incredibly fast. So that collection has grown. Right now we have 1,400 websites, the entire Wikipedia, the Centers for Disease Control, the Gutenberg Project, 40,000 books in the English language. There's about 14 million resources on this little box right here. And it's sort of like having a tiger by the tail. It seemed like a good idea a few years ago when we started, and now it's just been growing. We have this installed in over 300 schools and hospitals and clinics around the developing world.
Wow. You mentioned packaging up all the computers and sending them off, and you said that in one instance there was this resale which allowed for payment to someone to install all the computers. But I'm wondering whether WiderNet has ever had to send someone along to a location that was going to receive the donated computers to sort of help set it all up, or has that always been managed pretty smoothly on the other end?
No, we always send people to do the training, and that is, we know from the research that's done here, anywhere we install computers, in a university, in a business, in a school, if you look at the cost of doing that over 5-10 years, the cost of the stuff, the computers, the network, the software, is only 25%. So 1/3 of the cost is staffing the enterprise. 1/3 of the cost is training people. And that's just very expensive and very difficult. So what we do at the WiderNet project, we have a large number of training programs where we go with the computers, we train the technicians on the ground, we train the technicians to turn around and train each other. And as you mentioned, over 4,000 people have been through our training programs so far. And we really focus on train the trainer, build the capacity, and get these systems installed well. I just got back from the University of Jos. I visited them a couple of weeks ago, and they still have, and we started in 1999, we started an internship program where they would just bring in young students who had no computer skills and train them up on computer skills and have them train each other and put them in a situation where they would just sort of feed on that kind of energy. And they're still running that program today. And most of the staff who run their computer center now came out of that program. And so it's just what in the field is called building the human capacity.
And so you mentioned Africa. What other countries have you worked with in order to help them get this material?
We have, we're working on a project in India with the Dalai Lama schools for the Tibetan refugee children. And that, this is a great little project because we have, we're trying to pull together curriculum for these Tibetan children who have to learn the Indian national curriculum. And they have to learn English. So we're working with some students, some teachers in Dharamsala, India, the Dalai Lama's new capital. And we're also working with some students at the American Embassy School in Delhi. And so, and then we've got some volunteers here. So we've got people in numerous places pulling resources together and creating curriculum. But we also, we have, I think we're in 20 or 30 countries now.
Well, and the materials you mentioned, the material from the Centers for Disease Control, Gutenberg Project, and so on, these are mostly in English, right? Do the people on the other end receiving the eGranary digital library have to be able to digest this material in English?
Most of it's in English. And if we had time and money, the next thing would be to start making eGranaries in other languages. But we find, we've got some in Haiti and in Burkina Faso, but they're going into medical institutions, places where people are already working in English.
So tell us a little bit about your history with Africa. You've had a lifelong connection with Africa, or at least college and on. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, when I was in college, it took me 7 years to finish my undergraduate because I kept doing things like, at one point I just got enamored with the idea of going to Africa. I was, at the time, playing in a very bad rock band, playing as a drummer, and I sold my drum set so I could buy a ticket to go volunteer with a project in Liberia. And that was in 1982. And there we worked in some very remote villages, 5 hours away from the nearest road back in the bush, setting up clinics. And I keyed in to the need for quality water. And so when I came back to the States after that experience, I was going to Evergreen State College out in Olympia, Washington, and I got some of my colleagues together, and we went and hit the history books and came up with all these designs for drilling water wells from history. And we came up with one design from 1100 BC China called percussion drilling. And we found that it had been used through history. Thomas Jefferson drilled a well with this. In the 1800s, the oil wildcatters in Oklahoma and Texas were using it. And then it just kind of disappeared after the motorized versions came around. So we went back and we retooled it, and I wrote a book, and now I spend my vacations I spend teaching people to drill wells.
Man. And you were also, were you a Peace Corps volunteer?
No.
No. But you have been back to Africa many, many, many times.
Yeah.
And your greatest connection is with Nigeria?
Well, first Liberia.
First Liberia, but
now
jumps.
Nigeria. And we've been spending a lot of time lately in Uganda and Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia. We have some students here working on a project in Zambia where they're creating a portal for training medical students. And so they're working as a collaboration with some people at the medical school in Zambia and some people at the University of Alabama and some students here in our public health program. And they are pulling together thousands of resources and sort of lining them up with the Zambia national curriculum so that they have all these resources at their fingertips.
Yeah. Have you experienced any difficulties with, political restrictions in various countries where you've tried to bring these materials in and somehow or other you just haven't been able to work that out? Are there government restrictions?
No,
none.
Probably the biggest thing we're up against is sort of people with internet-centric ideas. People say, well, the internet would be so cool. And I have to agree. It would be wonderful to have the internet in all of these places at the speeds that we know it. But, $1.5 trillion has been spent on the internet for the first 1 out of 8 people on the planet. So that money isn't going to be available. The easy networking has been done. And, my take is, asking somebody or suggesting to somebody who has no books that they should get the internet is like telling somebody who doesn't have water, you should drink Perrier.
Yeah.
Right? So we're looking at coming up with other kinds of solutions that fit in. Some of the people who've got the eGranary have a little bit of internet, so they can get what they need, but they can do most of their work offline inexpensively.
Right. And how often do you update for these organizations that use the digital library? How often do you send updates, new material?
Well, that is an interesting question because we actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way to get updates out to the field. We spent a lot of time and a lot of money, right? But, we have 300 eGranaries out in the field. We charge $200 a year for updates, which is a nominal sum, and only 6 people have paid for updates. So we've learned a lesson from the librarians that we're working with, that they had nothing, now they've got 10 million documents, and in fact, one of the librarians very cleverly said, she says, that hard drive is going to die in 5 years. In 5 years, I'll buy another one, and I'll get all my updates for free. So, so we have the capacity, but we're finding that our partners aren't nearly as nervous about up-to-dateness. In fact, I'm happy to teach out of a 5-year-old textbook here at the University of Iowa.
The other day, one of your colleagues sent an absolutely beautiful video. You'll know the one I mean. I guess it came in, you had no expectation that this would arrive. And it was from the Creative Minds International Academy of Jos, Nigeria, or at least it focused on this group. And these are kids who've never held a textbook. Teachers who've never had books to work from now suddenly have this whole world that's open to them. Please talk about what we saw in this video.
Yeah. Well, I visited the International Academy when I was in Jos a couple of weeks ago, and it is amazing because it is some of the schoolrooms are simply brick walls with a piece of cardboard that's darkened on the wall for a chalkboard, and one bulb for light, and a dirt floor. But they have a lab set up. This family from San Jose went there with about 20 donated laptop computers and an eGranary and set up a lab. And so out of this world that these kids live in, when they walk in the lab, they click a button, and pretty soon they're looking at 3D animations of the universe, or they're learning about ancient, civilizations and stuff they never even imagined. And it's just, that's why we do the work we do. It is so exciting. We installed an eGranary at the medical school in Liberia last year. And I made the mistake of, we had just finished doing all the training on how to set up the computers. It was 5 o'clock, and I said, let's hook up the eGranary before we go home, so we're sure that it's working when we come tomorrow for training. Well, that was a mistake, because I didn't make it back to my hotel till 1 o'clock. The students were literally getting drunk. They were clicking on things and looking at stuff and they're getting up and dancing. And really,
Really? Oh.
Right. My students here don't do that.
So what are the biggest challenges now for your organization, for WiderNet and this eGranary project? Is it funding?
Always funding, and trying to come up with a model. We want to put out something that's accessible and affordable to people out in the field. More important than the technology that we've developed is we've developed this social contract, this agreement where authors and publishers have a safe place to put their material and know that it will get shared without people making a lot of money. And so we're always walking this tightrope between not charging too much, and so we're trying to build sustainability. Now lately, so what we've been doing is finding money from corporations and foundations to do the development, and having the subscribers pay for the per unit costs. So this last year we got a grant from Intel, and with that we developed what we call the Community Information Portal, and this is tools that we've added into the eGranary so that they can make their own websites inside the eGranary. They can make thousands of websites, and all the software they need to do that is built right in. So somebody with an eGranary can sit down, push a button, and start uploading their PowerPoint files and then things, and share it with each other. So that's our model right now, is to find grants to develop it, and then also find a way to make the production more sustainable.
And there's no commercial advertisement within all of this stored digital material, is that right? There's no
advertisement.
Yeah.
That might be a good idea, though. There's no advertisement. There's no pornography.
Yeah.
We have this in a couple of prisons here in Iowa, and they complain about that.
Oh.
Yeah. But it's a perfectly safe collection. That's what's unique about it, is that somebody can plug this in. In some areas, people are actually plugging it in to a wireless network and serving it up to the whole neighborhood.
Really?
So it's a free public wireless library, and it's all safe content.
That's amazing. And you said you have it in prisons here in Iowa. Are there very many places in the States that are using this material?
No, we're just doing a research, program with some prisons here.
Yeah.
Because prisoners can't be on the internet in almost every state in the U.S. because they could make more victims that way.
Yeah.
But they need education, and if when they get released, they need to know how to operate these kinds of technologies.
And you say you appreciate functioning computers. When people donate these computers to you, you really kind of need something that's a reasonable machine. But I take it they may be a few years old. They're not often the most current technology. Is that an issue?
No, they're usually the ones that we're taking today are Pentium 4, so they're 3, 4, 5 years old. And I was doing a training in Ethiopia, and we had shipped them what I thought were a bunch of Pentium 3s and 4s.
Yeah.
And we found a Pentium 2 in a cargo container. So I used that in class. I was tearing it apart and pulling out all the pieces and using it for a teaching tool. And I wanted to make the point that if you're done with something, just throw it away. Don't keep it. So I took the processor, this Pentium 2 processor that I pulled out of the motherboard, and I just glibly threw it. And one of the young men dove out of his chair, across the floor, and caught it with one hand. And he looked up at me and said, "I don't have a computer." I thought, "Oh man."
Yeah.
So the Pentium 4s in that context are incredibly valuable.
Yeah. So you see, obviously there's a lot of need. You see a long life for this project, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am so grateful you came and talked about it. Whatever I've read it doesn't quite give me the same, context as when I can hear you talk about it. And it must make you all feel wonderful to help distribute things we completely take for granted here. Those of us who are in the part of the world where we have internet access, even in the poorest parts of our communities. So thank you for this, and thank you for coming to talk with us.
Joan, thanks for this opportunity.
Yeah, this is Cliff Missen.
Right.
And he is also going to now go join his colleagues over here as sort of a sidelight. He has apparently a lot of repositories for his energy in addition to WiderNet. And one of them is the Yahoo Drummers. And we are going to have Cliff and his colleagues, the Yahoo Drummers, play. And I have to ask you about this title, by the way.
Right.
I recently had a little copyright issue with the name we first started calling this program. Does Yahoo come after you for calling yourselves the Yahoo Drummers?
Well, we were Yahoos before they were.
There you go. Okay. Well, so let's say thanks to Cliff while he goes over and gets himself ready to drum. Thank you. Thank you. While Cliff is getting ready, I'll just tell you who the other people with him are. Davy Collins and Carol Severino and also Tom Jaworowski are the Yahoo Drummers, and they're going to show you these wonderful instruments, and I think Cliff is going to talk to us a bit.
This is xylophone from northern Nigeria. It's the traditional instrument of the Maroon people. And, I do a lot of adventures in Africa when I go drum shopping. Because, you can't go to the mall. And I was wandering around a residential area looking for a drummer when I heard somebody playing this, and it just has such a magical sound. I stopped in to introduce myself, and the fellow who was playing it became my teacher for the next year. And he just come to my house every Sunday and show me how to play this. These are cow horns from the kind of Texas longhorn style cows that they grow there. You notice the little white things at the end of the cow horn? Those are spider webs that create kind of a buzzy noise. So I'll see if I can. Adds a little buzzy noise to it. And I try to pick these up at West Music, they just don't have. different types of talking drums around Africa. And this one is from the Hausa region of northern Nigeria. And one plays it by squeezing it and changing the pitch. And this is used a lot of times for communication in the old days traditionally. When I was in Liberia, they used talking drums to send messages, and I would get up in the morning with some of my friends and we'd say, hey, let's go to this village 2 hours away and do an inoculation clinic. They had no idea we were coming. We would just hit the road, but as we were walking, we would hear drums, and the drums would say, my eyes are to the road, meaning watch the road because somebody important is coming. And when we'd show up at the next village, the villagers would all be standing there, dressed, showered. They'd have food ready for us. They had no idea who was coming down the road, but they knew somebody was coming. Right? One time I made the mistake, I was with the group, we were walking through the rainforest, and I had a big canteen that I had drunk most of the water from. And as we're walking along, I'm just sort of playing the canteen, blah, 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 having fun. And these farmers kept meeting us at the path. And normally, they're out in the field farming, and we walk by, we say hey, they say hey. But no, these guys were standing at the path and looking at me. And we'd say hi, and they'd say awkwardly hi, and then we'd walk on, see you later. And about the third village, we came across somebody who spoke English, and he wanted to know who died. And I said, what? And the rhythm I was playing on my canteen indicated that somebody had died. And so they're all coming out to the path to find out. Oh well. the last song that we'll do is actually, it's an old academic argument. And I know how much you guys love that stuff. So, there's people who think 3, and some people think 2. So, we got one right down the middle of the room. And I need you to work with me on this one. Okay? So, those who think 3 would say 1, 2, 3. Can you work with me on that? 1, 2, 3. Use your hands. You can stop there as hard as it is. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so hang on. You guys are here. What do you think? 2. So we're going to see a mindless argument that goes on. It's the mother rhythm of all African music. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much. You just heard the Yahoo Drummers, and they were Cliff Missen, Davy Collins, Carol Severino, and Tom Jaworowski. And you know, before I let them go, I have to tell you a story Mick McBride told me just before we went on the air tonight, and that was that on those terrible days when everybody was sandbagging down by the river, many in this room, I'm sure, were there. Well, the Yahoo Drummers were there as well. They went down to sort of give some spiritual and moral and drumming support to all the people filling sandbags. So thanks for that, too. Thank you. So we are going to go now to our next group. Thank you. We're going to go to our next group, and we're going to be talking about a very different subject, human trafficking. And coming up to the stage right now are our guests. I'll let them get settled. WorldCanvass is from International Programs, your global intersection at the University of Iowa, connecting students, faculty, and Iowans with one another and the world. I'm Joan Kjaer, as you know, and our new World Reach initiative and showcases fascinating UI faculty, students, guest artists, and speakers involved in international teaching and learning. And WorldReach also supports many live events in this community, including educational programming for K-12 students and teachers. More information at international.uiowa.edu. So my next guests are here with me now. Rex Honey is right next to me. He's a geography professor here at the University of Iowa and also directs Crossing Borders. And nice to have you here, Rex. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Emily Lewis actually works with me in the international programs area, but she's also a graduate student in international studies and spent her summer very interestingly, as you'll hear in a moment. Denise Timmins is the young lady on the end, and she is the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Iowa and prosecuted the first human trafficking case here in Iowa a couple of years ago. So please welcome our guests. I will let everybody here describe human trafficking however they will, but just doing a little research, the most common thread I found was that it is considered to be commerce in people in ways very similar to slavery. And it's reported to be the fastest growing criminal industry in the world, with total annual revenue for trafficking in persons estimated to be between $5 and $9 billion. The Council of Europe states people trafficking has reached epidemic proportions over the past decade, with a global annual market of about $42.5 billion. And the United Nations estimates nearly 2.5 million people from 127 different countries are being trafficked around the world. I'm going to go first to Rex Honey, and I'll just ask you to tell us a little bit about the work you do, particularly in this area, and you can give us an overview.
Yeah, let me work to that by doing a little transition from the last section to this. I saw that xylophone in Kano.
Yeah.
The airplane that took a Fulbright Haze group that I was leading to Nigeria in the summer of 1999 dropped us off in Kano, continued on to Accra, Ghana, turned around and went back to Kano and picked up Cliff and his family. A few other people too, and brought them back home. Cliff is a friend from a long time, and I'm the board of directors of WiderNet, so I really do appreciate the things that he does. But Cliff's work there, and when he had the Fulbright in Jos, was so impressive that later, when I visited the people at the U.S. Embassy, they characterized Cliff as the poster boy for what a Fulbrighter should be like. Well, that would work for him, but working towards the trafficking now, there was a little problem that Carolyn, Cliff's wife, was worried about before they went to Nigeria. Sometimes when you have a Fulbright, they send you to Washington, D.C. for a briefing before you go. And Cliff and Carolyn went to Washington, and Carolyn expressed a concern about the discipline of children in the schools in Nigeria. They had two sons, young sons at that time, not quite so young anymore. I think they're both taller than Cliff is now. Carolyn was concerned about the corporal punishment. And one of the Nigerian Americans who was returning to Nigeria for a Fulbright assured Carolyn that this was not a problem. Corporal punishment was only used when the kids deserved it, which wasn't quite what she wanted to hear. Now, part of the problem with children and the way things work with children is that in Nigeria, as well as in much of the rest of the world, extended families take care of children. And when the extended families break down one way or another, then the safety for the children is broken. If you send your child to town, if you live in the countryside, to a relative, you can depend on the relative taking care of the child. The child is probably going to have to work, do housework, and in return, the child will get an education. As long as the extended family works properly, everything is fine. When the extended family doesn't work properly, and you have to send your child, if you want the child to get an education, off to strangers, then we have an opening for one of the kinds of trafficking that occurs. And that kind of trafficking is when parents are trying to do something for their children and are trusting someone else who betrays them. And this is unfortunately common in a lot of different places, but it's one of the sources of the people who get trafficked. Okay? Another kind of trafficking is when an individual sees an opportunity to make a living in another part of the world, or another part of their own country for that matter, has a tough time and wants to go someplace else, and puts themselves in a little bit of jeopardy by trusting someone else, and then winds up getting to the other place with a passport being confiscated, with debts to be paid, and being forced into illegal activity, whether it's drugs or sex or simply a thievery ring. So a second kind of trafficking works that way. One is vulnerable children whose families may well be doing what they think is the interest of the child. Now, maybe sometimes the child doesn't have an adult looking after their interest and betrays the child. So that's the one. And the other one is when people don't see themselves as having much of an opportunity to make a living where they are, so they agree to go someplace else, sometimes legally, sometimes illegally, but it puts them in jeopardy, and they then can become the objects of trafficking as well. So these two kinds of things, both of them because of differences of income within cultures as well as across cultures, make for people to be very vulnerable and lead to some really significant opportunities for people to exploit those and make a living. Now, clearly, Cliff and Carolyn were not wanting to get their kids trafficked. They were looking after them. But most parents are looking after their children. Sometimes they just don't know what it is that's going to be getting into. And of course, we have failures of families everywhere. Okay? We have it happen in this country, and we have it happen in other countries. And sometimes the people who really ought to be taking care of the kids are not doing so. So it's these kinds of things that lead to the trafficking.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that introduction. I think it takes us right to you, Emily, and you can tell us a little bit about the work you did this summer in Cameroon. Please follow up on what Rex was saying here and describe the work you did.
Sure. I've been studying trafficking for nearly 6 years through my undergraduate degree and as I complete my master's here. And I've primarily been focused on trafficking in children. And I think it's important to remember that trafficking, although it's for the same purpose, has very different aspects to it and changes depending on what country you're in. However, my work and research that I conducted was in the northwest region of Cameroon, in the capital city of Yaoundé, as well as a city called Bamenda. I worked with an organization called GLOA, Global Welfare Association, and they're a very small organization that's dedicated to upholding the rights of children. This time that I spent there this past summer, we worked on sensitization campaigns within the community to educate not solely on trafficking, but on human rights and child rights as well. We spent some time with radio broadcasts and some kind of street campaigns, but the goal really was to identify the top 5 trafficking-prone areas in the Northwest region to assess how we can better educate on prevention and protection efforts, as well as understanding a little bit better about government corruption for the prosecution of traffickers. There is a law in Cameroon specifically for child trafficking that was brought into effect in 2005. However, there is still not one prosecution under that law, although there's been thousands and thousands of cases identified. So that's primarily the work that I was concerned with.
Did you speak to victims of trafficking or to families who had lost children, for example, to trafficking?
Yes, I worked with many victims of trafficking, of different trafficking circumstances. I worked with children who were primarily involved in domestic servitude. I have worked with some victims of agricultural labor trafficking, and then I worked with a few girls who were victims of sex slavery. As Professor Honey had noted, a lot of the situations I dealt with were of families that were very destitute, wanting to provide their children with the best life possible, and were many times presented with an opportunity from a trafficker to not only provide education for their child, but to also teach their child a trade. And many of these parents were uneducated about the possibilities of trafficking, and so were brought into that situation that way. There are definitely situations of where children are kidnapped. However, that was not as prominent where I was located.
Well, let's turn our attention now to trafficking that happens here in the States. And we have the honor tonight of having Assistant Attorney General Denise Timmins here with us, who prosecuted the first human trafficking case under a law that was passed in 2008, 2007?
2007, I believe.
2007.
Yeah, and the conviction, or the case that we had, happened in 2008.
Yeah. So please tell us how that came to you and what the case was all about.
Sure. I actually got to travel to Denison, Iowa for my case, not Africa. So, but it's interesting to hear these viewpoints because what I have seen in the human trafficking cases that I've dealt with in this state, it's similar. There's a breakdown of family. We've got runaway kids. We have this subculture that's within our society that's allowing these things to go on, especially that I've seen with children. The case was referred to the Attorney General's office from the Crawford County Attorney's Office. At that time, the individual had been arrested and charged, but he had only been charged with the crime of pandering, which was basically putting out a couple of these girls for prostitution. I got the case, talked to some colleagues, and said, I think it's time that maybe we use this new law because this case was perfect for it. The girls started out actually in Fremont, Nebraska. They ran away from a juvenile home there that they were being held at. They ended up in Omaha, had met a woman named Jazzy at a hotel, and were later that evening, after spending the day with Jazzy, being provided alcohol, marijuana, they were introduced to Sir. Jazzy and Sir are the two defendants that we had in our case. Jazzy is Marsha Ryan, Sir is Leonard Russell. But that evening, we've got two young girls. One had just turned 15, one was 16. They were asked by Sir if they wanted to take off with them, and they said sure. They had nowhere to go. They wanted to get out of the area because they didn't want to get picked up by authorities, and off they went. They learned that evening in the car that they could stay with Jazzy and Sir. They'd be given food and shelter and clothing, but all they had to do for them was work. They soon found out that work included stripping and prostitution. So the girls they first ended up in Davenport, where we had a few acts of prostitution that occurred there. The internet was also used. Photographs were taken of the girls, placed on the internet. That's when I realized that you can buy people on Craigslist instead of just couches and furniture. But that was a tool. That's a tool that we see a lot used in these types of situations. They ended up going from Davenport to Rockford, Illinois, spent some time there, and then ended up in Denison, Iowa. And that is where they spent most of their time prostituting, as well as one of the girls was working every night in the strip club there. During their time there, one of the girls was told by Sir that she was going to go to Washington, D.C. to be with his cousin, as he called it, and so she was put on a bus from Sioux City and sent out to D.C. During the time frame that she was on that bus, the other girl was still in Denison. An anonymous tip had come in that contacted the Fremont police in Nebraska, saying that they believed this runaway girl was in Denison, Iowa. So Fremont contacts Denison. Denison police go right to the strip joint, and there's, Caitlin up on the stage. long story short, Caitlin lied at first and didn't want to say who she was and didn't want to go back home. But she finally gave up what had been going on. They were able to find out what bus Ashley had taken, and so by the time, luckily for her, by the time Ashley ended up in D.C., the Washington, D.C. Human Trafficking Police Force was waiting at the bus station for her and got her picked up. That's the basics of the story, but those are the situations that I have dealt with in this, and mainly the sex trafficking. What I normally see is young runaway teenage girls that have had issues at home, problems with the law, nowhere to go, and in walks in this charming, charismatic person who says, "Hey, I'll take care of you, but here's what you have to do."
And so Leonard Russell was convicted and is serving how long a sentence?
He was convicted, actually. He was charged with ongoing criminal conduct, 2 counts of human trafficking, and 2 counts of pandering, and he was convicted on all counts, and he got a 25-year sentence. So he's currently in the prison system. Now, Jazzy, or Marsha Ryan, we weren't able to find her, and actually the federal marshals helped us work on trying to locate her. But when she was actually picked up by the police during the middle of my trial of Leonard Russell. Mm-hmm. So we made the decision we're just going to hold on to her and take care of her case later. And that's what we did. We took into consideration with Ms. Ryan her situation. She was 19 years old herself. And, a few years earlier, she would have been considered a victim in the case, too. And it's difficult sometimes when you see these cases because sometimes your victims are your defendants and your defendants are your victims. So you have to kind of look through some of that. But she did end up pleading guilty to 1 count of pandering, did spend some time in prison. And the judge actually just this week, because she has completed all of her training classes and all of the things that the prison wanted her to do before she got back out on the streets, the judge did just release her this week for early release.
Yeah. Rex?
There are a number of international cases, of course, in this country as well, and I wonder if you could help us understand some of the limitations in terms of the way the law is set up and incentives for the victims of trafficking. My understanding is that the victims of trafficking are supposed to be eligible for a particular kind of visa, but sometimes, at least this is the way it gets reported, that information is withheld unless they'll testify against the people who traffic them. And of course, there often are very significant repercussions if they do that testifying. And I wondered if you could share with us what the actual situation is that way.
I can to an extent, but what you're talking about has to do with the federal law. Yes. And because I deal only with state law, I don't want to say too much. But with what you said, yes, that's what I know and what I see. I know with state law, we don't have those requirements or those issues.
I attended a conference in Dallas, Texas, and we discussed a bit about this with some ICE agents that were present, primarily discussing topics of agricultural labor and trafficking in Florida. From information that I've been given, victims can receive what's called a T visa, and that allows them to stay in the United States, I want to say up to 5 years. They're also able to have their immediate family from whatever country that they are from come and be with them as well. However, there are of course cases where families cannot be identified and they are not able to bring anyone else except for their immediate family. And that's supposed to aid them in their testimonies as well. There have been some issues with cops and other law enforcement that have been uneducated about the provisions of the T visa and have been quite forceful with victims and really, I don't want to say bribing victims, but maybe making victims feel uncomfortable about what their role is to serve on their own case, which is what Professor Honey was alluding to.
This is what a faculty member hopes, is that your student can answer the questions that you have. Okay?
Denise.
Well, I was going to add to that. I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have, though, is that whether it's because of fear of law enforcement, fear of being sent back home if they're a juvenile, fear of repercussions from their captor, whatever it may be, it is very difficult for victims to come forward. And even when they do, it's difficult to sometimes get honest answers out of them. This is a very underground type crime, and it is hard for law enforcement to get to it sometimes because we just can't crack through either the individuals involved and to get to the right people, or we just don't know about it.
Well, obviously we could talk about this for a long time, and it deserves a lot of conversation. I want to say thank you to the three of you for sharing your experience with this, and Denise for coming over from Des Moines. Thank you very much, Denise Timmins, Emily Lewis, and Rex Honey. Please say thank you to our guests. This is WorldCanvass, and I'm Joan Kjaer. WorldCanvass is a production of international programs at the University of Iowa, and we are moving into another segment now. We are coming to you from the Old Capitol Museum, the Senate Chamber, and a beautiful space here. We have a partnership with the Pentecrest Museums, with University of Iowa Television, and KRUI, and we're very grateful for their participation in this program. So now we're going to turn to a broader discussion of art and culture and life in Africa. And our three guests in this segment are Christopher Roy, just next to me, Leo Echo in the middle, and Sunday Goshit. So please say hello to them. So Christopher Roy, I'm going to start with you. Very good of you to come here and be with us tonight.
Pleasure.
I know that you've spent many years loving Africa, many parts of Africa, and you, I think, were a Peace Corps volunteer.
I was,
right?
yes.
Yeah. Well, so take us back. How did you begin to get engaged with Africa, and what are you doing now?
I think my first trip to Africa was in 1966 when I was 18 years old. I was arrested by the French police in Paris and given 24 hours to get out of France. So I hitchhiked to Marseille and took a ferry to Algiers and hitchhiked across North Africa to Egypt and then around the Mediterranean and back. And there were a lot of black Africans at a Bedouin festival in a town called El Oued in southern Algeria. And I thought it'd be lovely someday to go where they had come from. So Nora, my wife Nora, and I enlisted in the Peace Corps in 1970 when I graduated from college, and we spent 2 years in Ouagadougou and Burkina Faso, all over the country of Burkina Faso, which was then called Upper Volta or Haute Volta. And we've been going back ever since. We've been to many other places in West Africa, only in West Africa. But we keep going back to Burkina Faso because we have so many good friends there, and the people are so wonderful, and the culture is so rich. It's always attracted us. It's a magnetic place.
Mm-hmm. And so you teach here in the art history department at the University of Iowa? Yeah.
I've been teaching here since 1978. I came here because Max and Betty Stanley had offered their collection of African art to the university before I came. And the chair of the School of Art, the director of the School of Art, Wallace Tomasini, Maso, said that such a collection would be useless in a university where nobody was teaching African art. And so Sandy Boyd, the president, of course, immediately called up and said, Maso, wouldn't you like an appointment to have someone teach African art? And so I was hired and came here and worked with the Stanleys. We have the oldest African art history program in America here. The first PhD in African art history was given to Roy Sieber here in 1957. But when he left to go to Indiana University in 1961, he was never replaced until 78 when I came here. And so thanks to the Stanleys, thanks to their superb collection, which is one of the 3 best collections of African art at any universities in America, and the ongoing generosity of the Stanleys, we have a very successful program for graduates and undergraduates to study art and life in Africa.
Well, so can you tell us a little bit about some of the individual objects that are in the Stanley collection? Give us a little idea of the breadth of what someone will find when they look at the collection.
It's a large collection. There are 1,700 pieces. A lot of objects have been added by curators in the years, just in the past 20 years. Vicki Rovine was our curator until she went to the University of Florida, and David Reap, who's one of my PhD students, has been the curator, and he's still acquiring superb objects from the country he's doing his research in, which is Lesotho, high up on the mountains surrounded by South Africa. And a number of wonderful, generous benefactors have donated pieces to the university over the years. So even though the collection started with purchases by faculty in the years before the museum was founded, before the museum building was built, and then continued with the Stanleys' very generous gift, the collection grows every year in significant ways. We have an absolute superb collection of objects from what's now called the Congo, which for many years was Zaire. We have superb objects from the Kuba people who are famous because they're the subject of a lot of the literature about King Leopold's abuses in the Congo at the end of the 19th century, at the height of the rubber trade. The Kuba people were one of the principal people involved, were the victims of Leopold's predatory practices. We have great objects from Yoruba people in Nigeria. We have a couple of objects from Benin, which are very nice, from the Kingdom of Benin that left Benin City in 1897 when the British attacked Benin City, stole all of the art, burned the palace to the ground, and took all the art back to England to sell at auction. We have very good collections from West Africa, including Burkina Faso, where I do my own research. And from time to time, I collect pieces that have gone into the collection. I purchase them in the villages from the people who own them. And people like David Reap and others purchase them in Africa. One of my colleagues, Sarah Adams and Vicky Rovine, bought some very nice things in Ghana, in Bonwiri, which is the town where a lot of the beautiful textiles are woven. So things continue to grow all the time.
Well, this appreciation of art is not only about the objects. I mean, I know that your passion is how art and life are intermingled in Africa, the social context, you know.
Yes.
Tell us something about that.
Well, that's why the theme of the program is called Art and Life in Africa. This isn't actually strange to any area of the study of art history. Art anywhere in the world, produced at any time, has been a mirror of the lives of the people who made the objects, of the patrons who paid for it, the artists who created it, the people who used it. But in the case of Africa, this vast continent of Africa, it's particularly easy to use the objects to explain to students how creative the people are who made these objects, what the objects meant to them, how they were used, how they were worn, how they were handled, what role they played in the social, economic, religious, political lives, educational lives of the people who owned these objects. And often when African museum administrators come to visit us at the University of Iowa, they comment on how good it is, they feel, that these objects are being used to tell students at the University of Iowa and elsewhere, students who come here from states all over the country, about African life, using the objects as tools to explain the cultural, social, educational lives of the people who own these objects. And it's something that I enjoy doing because I enjoy going to Africa. I live to go to Africa like all of my colleagues here. I'm never as happy and never as excited as I am in a tiny little village in West Africa where it's hot and dusty and the only thing there is to drink is millet beer or palm wine, sitting around with all of my friends. When I went there first in the 70s, all of my friends were my age. They were all in their 20s or 30s. Now those guys and the women are all in their 60s. And they're all the distinguished elders in the villages. And we have just a wonderful time sitting around chatting about different things and drinking millet beer and having a good time. It's a hard job, but somebody has to do it.
I'm glad you can do it.
Yeah. And of course, the only way you can get to Burkina Faso, where I work, is by going through Paris, which is a sacrifice
that's another
too.
hardship. Yeah. Well, Leo Echo, let's introduce you. You are a professor here in the School of Journalism, Mass Communication. You're a documentary filmmaker, teacher about ethics and media, and you are from Africa. Tell us a little bit about your life in Africa and here, and some of the work you continue to do related to African subjects.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a professor. That's very strange. I never dreamed in my life that I would be a professor. When I graduated from college here in the United States, I went to college in a weird place. How I got here in the United States, I went to the American consul, not too far from my village, and I looked at the catalogs of all the colleges that were on display there. I looked and I just said, that one looks quite good. So I applied to that one, and guess where I ended up? South Dakota. And I was shocked at how cold it could get. Anyway, but the people were very nice, very warm. I made very many friends. All the Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri farm boys were my good friends. So I really had fun. But when I finished my graduate program, I was on fire. I wanted to change Africa. So I headed right back. 2 weeks after graduation, I'm from Cameroon, where the young lady visited, from the south of where she talked about. I'm from the coast. And I hit the ground with a thought. And first of all, my training is in journalism. And so getting a job in journalism was difficult because the government controlled all the media. And you have to be vetted, you have to be part of the system to get a job in journalism. And they really did not like people who would come with new ideas, those weird American ideas about freedom and liberty and the First Amendment, and that was very, very, very... So ultimately, through some friends, I got into the system. First of all, I taught English and French for a year. That's the first job I could get. And then I got into the system. I worked for the government TV station. It was a big disaster because you have to have your scripts censored in advance. I just couldn't work. So I became disenchanted, and I decided to quit. But just before I quit, there was a position open in an African Broadcasting Union position in Nairobi, in Kenya. So they were looking for somebody to produce programs and to be a translator because I can speak English and French and a couple of the languages. So I was hired. So I moved. That's how I got into documentary production. The first topic I was interested in, this was in the 80s, in the middle 80s, when AIDS just came out. We heard a lot about AIDS. So I was fascinated with the topic. So I started looking for people. There was still a big stigma. And the first documentary I did on AIDS, I was looking around. There was somebody who came up. He admitted in the newspaper that he had AIDS, and he was still alive. He was still married. So I traced him. I sent out messages. And one fine morning, somebody just walked into my office and he says, I am X. I'm the guy who was in the newspaper. I have AIDS. And I almost fainted because, you see, I was also ignorant about AIDS at that time. And so we had an interview in the studio, and my colleagues, at the end of the session, they were shocked. You didn't tell us this guy has AIDS. We're all going to get it, and so on. But it was all part of our education. So I felt that it was my job to educate the public and to tell people about AIDS. That was the first thing. Then I gravitated, since politics was off limits, I gravitated towards art. And I was fascinated as I traveled around Africa by the art and the kinds of worldviews. Being an African, I was familiar with the art and the culture where I came from, but I had a chance to look around. And there were two themes that really fascinated me. The first was women. How African art and African artists portrayed women. I have a couple pieces of art here which I collected along the way. This one is from the Congo. It's a bas-relief kind of, it's a new kind of art. It's about the faces of women. And if you notice, the faces are very sad. It's a collage of faces of women. It's the sadness of African women. The African women, like we say in my village, the African women hold up the African sky. Without them, the sky will collapse on us. but they have a very hard lot. So it's one of the things that fascinated me everywhere I went. I went to Burkina Faso, and again, some women, you notice she's carrying a baby here on her back, and it's a Fulani milkmaid. She's going around selling milk. She has her baby on her back, and she takes care of her life and the children. And there are many pieces like that. So that, it really, really fascinated me. And the second theme was the use of animals. Africans have this idea that it's a philosophical perspective of transilience. That is to say, there's a continuity between humans and animals. You see, in the Western world, humans are humans. They have the soul, they have a spirit given to them by God, and animals are animals, and the two can never meet. In the law in the United States, you have to have animal cemeteries and human cemeteries because the two are qualitatively different. In Africa, it's not the same. There is this, Africans believe that every human being has the animal in you. So there's a continuity between humans and animals. And a lot of our political leaders name themselves after animals. They say, I am the lion man, or I am the Mobutu is the cockerel, who owns all the hens in the village, and so on and so forth. And that became an opening for us as journalists. We have a new movement of satirical journalists in the 90s, when after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, we had a relative freedom of the press. And a lot of the satirical cartoons used those animals as a critique against the political elite to show that totalitarianism is actually animalistic.
So tell us about, you did some documentaries. One I read about was about Kjaer Kano.
Yes.
Yes.
I did a documentary about Kjaer Kano. Kano, for those of you who do not know, is one of the greatest African runners. He's from Kenya. He was the first African to win a gold medal at the Olympic Games in 1968 in Mexico City. Because you see, Africans were not allowed to participate in the Olympics before independence. And so when independence came, he was the first. He ran barefoot. He was not used to shoes. Most of the Africans, they would run miles and miles to go to school and back. And so when they found him in the village, they tried to make him wear shoes. And, halfway down the track, he threw the shoes away. And anyway, he won the medal. And then in the Munich Olympics in 1972, he won another gold and a silver. And then he disappeared. He went back to Africa. He disappeared into the bush, so to speak. So I was sent to go and do a documentary of him and try to trace him. It turned out to be a very interesting experience for me, in the sense that I went over there. I found he was living way up in the hills in Kenya. In the highlands of Kenya, by the rift, after the Rift Valley, and he and his wife, they had 92 children. That's the first thing I said. Gosh, this guy must be a sexual athlete, just like he is an athlete. But it turned out that he had 5 children of his own, but he had adopted more than 80 children. Some of the children we're talking about here who had been trafficked or abandoned, this athlete will go into the streets and bring these children, adopt them, and they took his name and they became his children. So when I went there were 92 of them. So every time he went racing, wherever he had to come right back, because he was the father of 92. And his wife, it was amazing. There were some of them had grown up, some of them had gone to college, and they were from many tribes, not just one tribe, which is a very, very interesting situation in Africa, where you have many tribes and people are very conscious of their ethnicity. He didn't care what tribe the children came from, and so he adopted all of these. And Not only that, he was helping to train the young runners. A lot of young runners from Kenya, from up the hills, who wanted to take part in marathons and go to the Olympics, they came to him for advice. What should we do? How, it's a big world out there. How should we approach the world? So he had some kind of a runners club where he was helping to mentor the young runners. And the last thing, he also was very traditional. He says, even though my children, a lot of them were abandoned, they were trafficked, I need to connect them back to their African roots. So he made them go through initiation ceremonies. And in East Africa, that means circumcision. And so all the boys, once they are 16 and over, have to go through that ceremony without benefit of anesthesia. And they go through the village doctor who did that. And so we had a chance to take just a little peek. But there was one little test. I had a crew of, there was me, a camera operator, and a technical assistant, and we had a translator. So we went up the hill, and we were carting our equipment, and just as we were going to approach, we heard all the dancing and the music. We had the talking drums up the hill, summoning all the villagers to come to the dance. And just before we reached the location, we were stopped. We were told that, you see, everybody who witnesses this ceremony must have gone through it themselves. So the question is, have you gone through this ceremony yourself? Very, very personal and private question. And I looked around on my three colleagues. The problem is that in Kenya, there are some tribes that do not go through the ceremony. It's against their culture, and there are some who do. And so I looked around. The rule is that if you have not gone through the ceremony, you join the line. And so it was very tense. As a producer, the first question they asked you, has your crew been cut? And so we were a little bit, but ultimately, Kipchoge Kano was waiting for us. We were held hostage, essentially. And so Kip was waiting for us, and when he didn't see us, he started running down the mountain to find out what happened to us. So he found that we had been held, and somebody was trying to inspect us. And so he convinced them, he has a lot of influence. So he convinced them, they're all fine, they have all gone through the ceremony, they're all fine. So he took us up there, and we shot only for like 10 minutes. And the people started grumbling, and so Kip's wife, we didn't understand the language, so Kip's wife came to us and said, I think you better leave right now, because some people they are not very happy. And they had their spears and their bows and arrows, and we were way, 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 way up there. I am from West Africa, 5,000 miles away. I'm not familiar with the culture, so we were able to, she got us out of there, took us to her mother's home, where they served us some local beer and some fermented milk to just calm us down. The fermented milk where they have some herbs and some blood from cows. They mix it there, and just to calm you down. It was the most horrible experience. But the documentary turned out okay. We won it. Actually, we did win a prize for that documentary. So.
Thank you. So that's Leo Echo. And our third guest here is also from Africa. This is Sunday Goshit. And I first met you when I began to work in international programs. And you've been connected with international programs for some time. And first of all, tell us about your life, where you've come from, and how long you've been here. But also tell us about some of the activities you take on going out into the schools here in the city. I think it's very interesting.
Thank you very much. I would start by saying that I am one of the beneficiaries of some of the first things that were discussed here by Cliff. And indeed, it was Rex Honey who came over to Nigeria with the group of teachers in high school and a number of professors from UNI to, I think, develop a curriculum for teaching the geography of Africa in Iowa schools. Then I knew very little about Iowa. I happened to be on the team that he was on, and being a faculty member at the University of Jos, and we were the host university. So we had the opportunity of going out with them, and actually he gave me the offer to come over to Iowa and first of all pursue my studies. But initially it was a plan to come over here and maybe spend 1 year, collect enough information, and go back and complete my PhD at the University of Jos. Eventually it turned out that when he came and they discussed with his colleague, they offered me the opportunity to come and do the PhD here. Immediately after the discussion and he left, that was the time Cliff had just come to Jos, and he'd helped us to actually connect the campus through the cable. And even though we didn't have internet, but he was able to help us develop access to the internet. It was my first experience with a computer, but it was amazing how fast I was able to communicate with Rex and David McGuinness to be able to get over to Iowa. So I owe a lot of gratitude to the WiderNet project, then with especially Cliff, who was in Jos, and more so to Rex and Rebecca Roberts, who led the team to Jos. So that's my story of how I got to Iowa. They didn't tell me, though, that I was coming to Iowa and that Iowa was different from Jos. Jos is the coldest part of Nigeria, and every other person around the country complains that that Jos is really too cold because it's about 4,000 feet above the surrounding areas, and it's nothing compared to what you have in Iowa. So I made my journey to Iowa and came here in 2000, came here in the summer, gracefully. My first shocker was when it was 8 o'clock and the sun was still in the sky. I couldn't believe that because in Nigeria it is 6 to 6, so you have 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. And so I had that first shocker of, I think it's 8 o'clock now, but the sun was still in the sky. I came here to do a PhD in geography, and gracefully I just completed the program. I have a lot of experience in Iowa, living in Iowa, a lot of things to contrast between Iowa and my hometown in Nigeria, and a lot of things to compare too. But one of the greatest experiences which we shared, was my experience with people in Iowa, especially in the rural part of Iowa, and also my experience as a volunteer in the international programs, first working with the WiderNet project, and then volunteering as a speaker in schools in Iowa. I'll start by first my experience with the rural people. When I first came here, we have this great program in the international programs we call the Friends of International Students. This is a very, very good program that takes international students into the homes of Iowans so that they get to know, understand the culture, and be able to integrate into the system as they continue in their studies, so that we're not just locked up in the labs. Now, I met a wonderful family in West Liberty, and so they gave her my name. She called me and told me that she was my host mother. Then I was 40 years old. She was 38. She was my mother. And she came and picked me and took me to their home. Her husband and their 3 children. They have 3 children, 1 they adopted. Very wonderful people. When immediately I got into the house, I was welcomed. And first of all, driving from Iowa City, in fact, my first experience driving from the airport to Iowa City was shocking, because the concept of a city in Nigeria is a very big place with, for example, Lagos, which is really very crazy. By the time I got to Iowa City and my friend Brennan Kraxberger picked me from the airport and we're driving to Iowa City, And we drove, first of all, through the forest. Actually, when the plane landed, I was wondering, where are we going? Are we going to enter another plane to Iowa City? And by the time we drove into the city, and they said, this is Iowa City, I said, okay, at least I can contend with this. But then when I drove further out into the country in West Liberty, it was further a wonderful experience. I had the experience of myself growing on the farm and appreciating the farm, reoccurred to me. And then here was this family that was really just not the kind of America we see on TV, but a real wonderful, very warm American family. I spent the night in their house that day. And subsequently, they kept coming to pick me. Actually, almost every weekend, they wanted me to go and spend the weekend there, but I had to do my assignment, so I told them it was not possible. I realized that they had a very, very good extended family like we have back home. So they were in touch with almost all their siblings, and I really enjoyed being with them. The climax was when my wife came and my children. We have 4 children, and all of them came in December of 2001. And when I took them over there and she saw the family, the first response my wife gave was, "Are you sure these are not Nigerians?" And my question to her back was, "Do we have white Nigerians?" So that was the kind of connection that we have. And we still have very, very tight ties with them. Their father writes to me as his son. And that is just to echo, like Dr. Echo said, the kind of warmth that you receive. But sometimes when you come and you stay within the cities, I think you get deceived about what America is until you go into the rural areas and find people who are living the real American life. Then I got to know the international programs very well through the Office of International Students and Scholars, and also through the WiderNet project, because then they were housed in the same office, and used to go to Cliff's office almost every time to volunteer in cleaning up some of the computers. And the Office of International Students was very helpful to me in processing the papers to bring my family over. And so I found out that they had a lot of very good programs. Programs like they have a summer institute for teachers. They also had a summer program for students. But we also had what we call the International Classroom Journey. Incidentally, that is what I coordinate now. The International Classroom Journey is where we recruit volunteers, international students as volunteers, to go into Iowa schools and talk about their countries. So I had a very good opportunity and I love storytelling, especially African folklore. So I participated by going into the Iowa some of the classrooms and tell the students stories, and so tales by the moonlight, the stories that we would have, sing some of the songs and dance around with them. And it was a very, very good experience. Mm-hmm. And so I continued to volunteer in that capacity until 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to be a graduate assistant in the international programs itself, and worked in a very, very good program too, which we call it's a living learning community that we call the International Crossroads Community. A very good program that brings international students together with domestic students together in the same place. And it used to be called the Foreign Language House, where people who are learning the same foreign languages stay together and practice. But then it was broadened into a living learning community where you not only talk about the language, but also other aspects of the culture. Mm-hmm. And it was a very good experience for me, because I coordinated what we call the programmers who organized some of the programs that the students were involved in that would bring them together. Mm-hmm. And like I said, now what I do is I work with the outreach unit with the International Crossroads Community, International Classroom Journey. And so I do the recruiting of the volunteers and then set them up with teachers who want to get students from different countries to come and speak to.
And I know that you're one of the most popular ones, too. I hear within the office that whenever you go out, we receive photographs back from the classroom teachers. Oh, we had such a good time. And I know that you take the culture kits to the classrooms and show fabrics, textiles, made materials, and so on. And we're very lucky to have you in international programs. And I want to say thank you, Sunday. Sorry to have to wrap this segment up, but thank you, Sunday Goshit. Thank you, Leo Echo. And thank you, Chris Roy. I really so appreciate this. This fun set of stories that you brought to us. So say thank you, please. You're listening to WorldCanvass from International Programs at the University of Iowa, and we want to let you know that we're partnering with Prairie Lights Bookstore, and we'll be bringing you more information about a new program called Prairie Insight in the next few weeks. And you can also learn something about that, about the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council, and about Civic by visiting our website, international.uiowa.edu. And now another guest I've been looking forward to for a long time, Alan Brody, is a former UNICEF officer in Swaziland, China, Afghanistan, Turkey, and Nigeria, who's returned recently after retiring from UNICEF to live here in Iowa City. And I guess you're lecturing, traveling a bit, you work as a consultant, you're a writer. And I'm going to just turn it to you, Alan, so you can tell us a bit about your work with UNICEF and this wonderful story you've brought to share.
Sunday just mentioned telling stories, and stories are so much a part of the African culture, and particularly the use of fables and things like that to deal with sometimes complicated issues. And when I went to Swaziland in 1999, we had a very complicated issue we were facing. It was about to hit us. Between 1992 and 1998, the HIV prevalence among pregnant women had risen from less than 4% in 92 to over 32% in 1998. Now, HIV infection does not immediately lead to AIDS. It's usually 6, 8, or 10 years or so before the real trouble comes. So we could predict that around 2000 or 2002, we were going to be inundated with a disaster. At the time when I arrived there were people who knew about this, the people working on HIV prevention, public health people. There was a big dispute going on between them and the churches in Swaziland. Christianity is very strong in that country. And there was a big argument about the issue of condoms. And the prevention people said, well, the churches and the schools should be teaching kids about condoms or even distributing. And the church people were saying, no way, we don't do that. That's not who we are. And while they were fighting, HIV was continuing to spread unchecked. As a kind of neutral party in this, as head of UNICEF, but also as someone with a background in literature and an appreciation for the role of storytelling, I thought, let's engage the churches and look at what they can do other than condoms, because I knew that was a non-starter for them. And one of the ideas I had was to develop a couple of books that could be used in Sunday school to deal with some issues. And we started out by commissioning the Christian Media Center there to develop 2 books. We wanted one on stigma and discrimination, to try to encourage people to be more open, to understand HIV and AIDS. As Leo was saying, many people had no clue. They're afraid to be near people, to understand it and do that through the children and through the Sunday schools. And the other issue we took up was the issue of sexual abuse of children. So it really ties in with the other things we've been talking about. Sexual abuse is such a terrible issue under any circumstances. Then imagine if you're in a country where you have HIV infection at the levels we're talking about. It just makes it that much worse. And you have young children and even teenagers, by the time they're reaching 18 or 20, already huge numbers are infected. So we tried to address this. We commissioned them. I gave them outlines of the stories. They came back after some back and forth. Instead of 2 stories, they brought 3. And the third story was in the form of a fable about rock rabbits and other animals, and was a fable to promote abstinence. So abstinence from sex was what the churches wanted. Unfortunately, the story, the way it was written, completely undermined the other story we were doing to try to fight stigma and discrimination. And I also realized very quickly that whether UNICEF said, well, we'll support you or not to print this, the Christian Media Center was going to bring out a story on abstinence. And I said the only way I could be sure that such a story would not do more harm than good on the other things would be to rewrite it or write a new one myself for them that they would be happy with and could use. And that's how I went back to my roots as a fiction writer, now a children's story writer, and was the basis for the development of the forbidden frou-frou fruits epidemic, which I'm going to read to you this evening. I've changed some of the names in it because I found, reading it to some people the other day, the Swazi names, they got mixed up, who's boy, who's girl. So I've used some American names, and also changed from rock rabbits, which none of you have ever seen, to rabbits. The other thing, Leo, if you could reach right next door under there, there's a set of books down there. If you could pass those around. This is the set of books I thought people would be interested to see, just to pass them around, see the way they're illustrated. One of them is this story, but there were 5 others that we produced. So while those are going around, I'm just going to read you this little story. Once upon a time in Animal Land, the king of the animals made just 3 rules. 1, all the animals should be nice to one another. 2, all should respect what belongs to others. 3, no animal should eat the fruit of the frou-frou tree without first getting instructions for how to ripen and cook it right. That third rule meant frou-frou fruit wasn't for children, because the only place to get those instructions was in an old-fashioned marriage ceremony. Old-fashioned just means the kind of marriage where the husband and the wife make promises to love and to care for each other, to have children and to care for them, and to stay together for the rest of their lives, through the bad times as well as the good. And they actually mean it. What's a frou-frou tree? I think I hear you asking, and you better speak up with your question. Otherwise, what's the use of spending your time here? In those days, every boy animal and every girl animal had a frou-frou tree planted for them when they were born. Their parents planted those trees in a big pot so that when the little ones grew up and got married, they could take their own frou-frou tree along with them to their new home and plant it in their own gardens. Male plants and female plants each bore a different-looking fruit. If you waited until the fruits from both trees were ripe and you knew how to put them together to cook, they made a very delicious food. But if you cooked and ate them when they were green, they could make you sick. The husband and wife animals only cooked their frou-frou at night, after the children went to sleep. They didn't want their children to get any ideas about cooking the frou-frou fruit themselves. Rules are rules, they used to say. The rule says children must abstain from eating frou-frou fruits. Of course, some young animals just think a rule is there for breaking, and young Brother Rabbit was one of those. He often pretended to fall asleep near the garden in the evening, when he was really lying awake and listening to hear if his parents would get frou-frou fruit off their trees and start cooking it. Young Brother Rabbit's own frou-frou tree was getting pretty big, and he had noticed that his friend Sally Rabbit had a frou-frou tree that was looking pretty mature as well. So he had some ideas that if he and Sally could get together, maybe they could get their frou-frou trees to bear fruit, and they could cook some delicious stuff for themselves. He thought if he listened hard enough to the sounds of his parents harvesting and cooking the frou-frou fruits, he might learn how to do it for himself. But it was always too dark for young Brother Rabbit to figure out how his mother and father were doing that. Around that time, some monkeys moved into the animal kingdom. The monkeys brought a lot of picture books and even had a motion picture machine. Young Rabbit started to hang out at the monkeys' place called the Tree Roost Cafe. Of course, it was normal for monkeys to hang out like that because they had long arms suitable for hanging from tree branches. The young rabbits, with their short little arms, looked foolish when they imitated the monkeys, and some even fell and hurt themselves. But they kept coming back because they thought it sounded cool to say they were hanging out at the Tree Roost Cafe. The monkeys said that if you were cool, you didn't have to pay attention to adults and their rules. Young rabbits who saw the monkeys moving pictures thought they were the coolest of all. One day, Mickey Monkey asked young Brother Rabbit to be best friends. That made young Brother Rabbit proud because Mickey was a little older and was one of the most popular young monkeys of all. Mickey had some pictures of monkeys cooking the frou-frou fruit, and he showed them to young Brother Rabbit. "Come back next week to see moving pictures," Mickey Monkey told him, and gave him a large handful of sweets to take along with him. "Bring your frou-frou tree and I'll show you how to make it bear fruit. I have a new t-shirt to give to you, too." Mickey Monkey had the coolest t-shirts in the animal kingdom, so Brother Rabbit was tempted. When young Brother Rabbit was on his way home, however, he started thinking about the king's rules, and his conscience began to trouble him about what Mickey Monkey was proposing. He saw his father, Pastor Rabbit, out in the field talking with Papa Bull. Young Brother Rabbit decided it was time to ask his father for some serious advice, rabbit to rabbit. Brother Rabbit approached his father and Papa Bull with a troubled look on his face. Mickey Monkey was his friend, young Brother Rabbit was thinking. He gave him sweets to eat and had promised him a very beautiful shirt. But young Brother Rabbit didn't understand what Mickey Monkey wanted with his frou-frou tree. "Yes," his father asked when he drew near. "Speak up, son." "Father," young Brother Rabbit said, summoning up his courage, "it's about my frou-frou tree." Pastor Rabbit stood back on his hind legs and his head snapped back on his neck like someone had given him a slap. "Oh my," the pastor said, rolling his eyes up towards the sky and blushing to the roots of his snow-white fur to have his son say such an embarrassing thing in front of Papa Bull. "These children today, Papa Bull, can you imagine?" "Father," young Brother Rabbit said, "I need to know." "You need to know when to keep your mouth shut," his father interrupted him angrily. "Those words are for grown-ups, and you've got years to go before you're grown up. Do you hear me?" Young Brother Rabbit felt his cheeks burning with shame, and his whiskers twitched with the effort to hold in his anger. "Yes, Father," he almost whispered, and hopped away as fast as he could down the hill. "Over here," a voice called, just as young Brother Rabbit reached the road at the bottom of the hill. In a grove of trees of a nearby meadow, he saw his friend, Sally Rabbit, nibbling on grass. He tried to put a smile on his face because she was always smiling at him. Young Brother Rabbit told her he had seen some very interesting pictures over at Mickey Monkey's, and that Mickey was even going to show him moving pictures about cooking and eating frou-frou fruits. "Sometimes I hear my parents making frou-frou at night," Sally Rabbit said, "and I think it must be very sweet. Will you come back and tell me all about it?" "You bet I will," he said. Now, I don't want to go on forever with he saids and she saids. To make a long story short, young Brother Rabbit went with his frou-frou tree to Mickey Monkey, who showed him how to make the fruit grow and to cook it green. But monkeys are kind of dirty. Mickey Monkey's frou-frou tree had a disease on it. The disease made Brother Rabbit sick for a short time. After that, he felt fine, but he didn't realize that Mickey Monkey's disease had infected his own frou-frou tree. No one could tell just by looking that his frou-frou tree was spoiled. At first, young Brother Rabbit's conscience bothered him because he'd broken the king's rule, and he didn't go back to see Mickey Monkey. But he wore the beautiful shirt that Mickey gave him, and Sally Rabbit admired the way it looked on him. Pretty soon, young Brother Rabbit and she were going off to places to be alone and talk, and she begged him to tell her all that he knew about cooking the frou-frou fruit. And as you can guess, they were soon cooking and eating frou-frou with each other. Mind you, they weren't married, and so they were cooking the frou-frou fruit green. But even so, they thought it tasted fine. They cooked it together for a while until they got tired of each other. That's what happens when you harvest your frou-frou fruit too early with someone. You get tired of each other later on. The disease that young Brother Rabbit got from Mickey Monkey, he passed on to Sally Rabbit. When I say he passed on that disease, I don't mean he got rid of it in himself. He still had it in himself, and he passed it to Sally Rabbit and her frou-frou tree as well. It's easy to pass on, especially when you take that fruit green. When young Brother Rabbit got tired of Sally, he snuck away one day to be with her little sister, Honey Rabbit. And Sally snuck off and taught her cousin Patrick Rabbit how to cook the frou-frou fruit, and she taught his little brother Tommy how to do it too. When young Brother Rabbit started getting sick and losing weight and not looking so smart in his Mickey Monkey t-shirt anymore, Honey Rabbit left him for a new boyfriend rabbit. The rabbit sisters, Sally and Honey, passed the disease along to their new boyfriends. And their boyfriends got some new girlfriends. And those girlfriends got some new boyfriends. Each time, the disease jumped and spread from one rabbit to the next, spoiling their frou-frou trees without them even knowing it. That's how the frou-frou fruit's disease went from one rabbit to two, and then from 2 to 4, and 4 to 8, and 8 to 16, and 16 to, and 32 to, and on and on. And that's what people mean when they talk about an epidemic. No one carrying the frou-frou fruit's disease looked sick at first, but after some time, the disease started coming out and killing those who had it. Young rabbits started getting sick and becoming skinny and then dropping dead everywhere, in the meadows, in the trees, where they were hanging out with the monkeys, down in the valley, along the roadsides, and up in the rocks, everywhere. Pastor Rabbit began to preach at funerals every weekend. He preached for so many children of his friends and relatives, and he preached at the funeral of his own son, young Brother Rabbit. "I was wrong," he cried out to all who cared to listen. "I should have suffered him to come unto me. I should have listened to him to hear the guidance he needed from me." That's the end of my story, or almost the end. When Pastor Rabbit and all the other grown-ups in Animal Land understood the error of their ways, they stopped just lecturing at their children, "Abstain, abstain." "It's not enough just to repeat the rules," Pastor Rabbit preached to all the animal parents. "You have to teach why those rules shouldn't be broken. And to teach well, you have to listen to your children. Otherwise, how will you ever know what's bothering them?" Lots of young rabbits died because they were already carrying the frou-frou fruits disease. But the younger ones who grew up with better guidance learned how to stay healthy. Soon enough, things got back to the way they used to be for the rabbits before the forbidden frou-frou fruits epidemic began. That's why, even to this day, you can see lots of rabbits everywhere. If you look out in the meadows, you may even see Pastor Rabbit there lecturing to Papa Bull. "The best protection against disease is knowledge," Pastor Rabbit is saying. "Have you taken the time to give your children knowledge, Papa Bull?" "Amen," Papa Bull will moo his assent. Can you say it too? Amen. Thank you.
So thank you for sharing that with us. And did you find when you first shared this story with the Sunday school teachers and with the church officials, as well as your colleagues in UNICEF, that this hit all the points you needed to hit?
Very much so. What we were trying to do was give an opening for people to start discussing, both the kids to ask questions and the parents also to talk, because it was as difficult for the parents and for the adults to bring up these sensitive issues. No one was talking about sex. This was actually, something that had been brought by Christianity, was this kind of Puritanism that resulted in generations that just didn't understand. It didn't make for less sex, it just made for less education about it, less knowledge. So this, actually, of all these 6 stories, I think this became the most popular. Both even younger children who didn't understand what it was about, they thought it was about obeying rules and so on. They liked it as a fable. And then the older children liked it, although it seems very childish, they loved it because they were into onto what was going on. So they felt very clever and they enjoyed it as well.
Well, thank you again so much for telling us about the background to the story and for sharing the story with us. And I want to say thank you to all of our guests tonight. Such an interesting evening. And to those of you who came out on a cold December night to join us down here, thank you also to our friends and colleagues here at the Pentecrest Museums and KRUI and UITV for producing this program this evening. I'm Joan, Kjaer with International Programs, and I'd like to let you know that our next program will be in this room on January 22nd, and the topic will be Taping the World. I think it'll be very interesting. I hope you'll come. And we have a couple of other new program initiatives. Please check out international.uiowa.edu for other things you might enjoy. So thank you so much. Good night.